Hey guys, Andy again, spoken day, back in the house on a Sunday afternoon. It's been a radical day this morning because I went out to do a bit of food shopping and I got wet. Come back, got wet. Now I've sat in the study, got back to me to talk to a dear friend of mine today, and his sun's come out, which it has in the world of my friend Peter Humphreys over in Lancaster, hasn't it, Peter? 'Cause you said he's been sunshine where you are today, isn't it?
There's been a rare sighting of it. Yeah, I've moved to the only place in England I think that's rainier than Manchester, and we've had a few days of it, and now the sun is back out again. So, yeah, showing off all the flowers and plants in this little leafy green area of the city I'm in. So all
Stop
is good.
rubbing it in. I'm in concrete heaven, I am, mate. Right? Listen, mate. People want to check you out. Obviously, it's the second time we've had you on, and we've just worked it out. And I can't remember how we met, so perhaps you can remember what it was. We reckon it was over lockdown, don't we? Originally, about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think it would have been. Yeah, when we were all producing stuff at home. I mean, I know your podcast has been
Hmm.
going much longer. That's when I started podcasting. And with that sort of looking onto Instagram, there's a lot of people sharing their poetry there and through podcasts and I made a few good friendships, including with yourself around that time. And then yeah, we were trying to work out the order, weren't you? Whether you and Amanda were on the first impressions pod I did, or whether that was slightly before. Is it probably around the same time
Yeah,
as then?
think so as well.
I
Because
first
people
came on.
look, they will see obviously originally on September 22, so it's 3 years ago or so, and it
Yeah,
shows you
yeah.
that the time goes like that because it's weird because like we've met
Oh,
several times in person at Speak Easy now, haven't we? And it's like
yes.
it tends to muddy the waters sometimes. So
It's hard to remember sometimes. Yeah, how often we met in person compared to online. It's probably more online with everything that happened with COVID. We've probably chatted more here, but yeah. So it was great to see you in person at the
yeah, brilliant.
at the
That's what.
event on Thursday. It was really good fun. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was fantastic fun. Now, obviously, we're not here to talk about Speakeasy today or Lancaster, although Lancaster does appear in your new novel, but we'll come on to that shortly. Now, obviously, Peter, for people who don't know you, first of all, then, you better give us a quick rundown. Obviously, we don't need to go epic on this because people can check the first podcast out. Where did all your
Mm.
creativity and writing come from originally?
Well, I mean, I was looking back. I think I was someone, and this comes through in Adrift, the new novel, because I'm reflecting quite a lot on, my upbringing on the Wirral and then moving to Liverpool. I think I always was interested in writing. I was always a big reader, and I think I didn't do a lot of writing. I'd write the odd poem, and I've always kept a diary, but I hadn't really put the work in until I moved to Manchester, and then I did the MA creative writing in Manchester, sort of early 2000s. Moved to Hong Kong, and took on some editing roles there, and I joined the Hong Kong Writers Circle. Just really just becoming more and more committed and like yourself involved in the writing community of wherever I was, from Manchester to Hong Kong, and then really knuckling down and finding the time and realizing that you've just got to make the time to do it if you're going to do it. So getting up early, writing for a couple of hours each morning, that kind of thing, just taking it a lot more seriously. So the love of literature was already there, and I was probably calling myself a writer sometimes, and but without doing a lot of writing, because I love the romantic idea of it, and then later on you find out it's great, but it's not always that romantic. You've got to get down and do it and do the redrafting and and redraft again and stuff. And
Yeah,
here we are.
brilliant.
Yeah, yeah.
3 years later, indeed. So, yeah. Now, obviously, before we go into your novels, we better make people aware. So we've dropped hints already. And one of these I didn't even know the name was till you told me 5 minutes ago, was obviously you've been involved or running three podcasts of your own, aren't you? So do you want to tell us, obviously, I know obviously Monkey Scribblings obviously won't be going anymore for reasons you explain in a minute. I don't
Hmm.
know if First Impressions is still going or indeed Pet Projects, your other one. So tell us about
Yeah.
the podcasting you do.
Well, the first impressions, it has been, it's been over the years. That started during COVID when I actually found I had more time for podcasting. It was probably coming out every month. And what I loved doing was, I approached writers and artistic types, creative types I kind of knew. And I like the idea of having a decent, long chat with them about their inspirations, etc. And I loved using GarageBand to do that because then I could mix in some beats, some tunes, some melodies, and just create a nice little package. and also read some of my own works, my own poetry or novel extracts within that. So that was really good fun to do, quite labor intensive, putting those together. And then later on, so it's still going, it's probably in, hibernation, I guess, because of, then going on to do pet projects, which we've had 10 episodes of that. And my wife Anita has helped put that together. She's done the artwork and provided a lot of the inspiration for that. And she's really made me an animal lover. So I think we've done 10 episodes of that over a year. And then once I've done, the novel promo I'm doing now, we'll go back and do a few more. But I've really enjoyed that, and I hope people will check it out. It's really friendly. It's a really good way of getting people who are, writers who have had some, decent level of success in some cases, and they've been asked the same questions about writing. They've not really been asked about their little dog, and that I think that's a way of relaxing people and bringing out a lot of good stuff. So I've really enjoyed
Brilliant.
that. And then, yeah, that's been really fun, and lots of animal sound effects again, a bit of my own music in that. And then the monkey scribbling one is probably the most important thing I've done, with the podcasting, because that was with a friend, Rich, who was one of the reasons I moved to Lancaster, and he got ill, and we recorded that shortly before we lost Rich. And that was all based on the letters we'd shared as students, which he'd found. Unfortunately, we
Oh,
both kept this correspondence. So it was
fantastic.
reading the letters to each other. We changed a lot of the names, and it's all the embarrassing stuff you get up to as students in your early 20s. And what was great with that, again, because Rich is a massive music fan. And at the end of each letter, we put in what we'd been listening to that
Wow.
week. And so then I was playing those tunes on the podcast as well. So it's kind of a nostalgia trip, but it was just lovely to spend time. Recorded it out the summer house out back here,
Oh,
and could just
fantastic.
forget about the illness and everything else, and just enjoy each other's company and do that. So those are the three basically. Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, hopefully we'll hear something new from you and your podcasting world soon. I suspect you probably will when the novel thing's over, yeah, because it's fair enough. So I get time for everything. I can understand with that. Now, obviously, novel time now. Yes. Now, I've been spending all these past 2 weeks reading your new novel, Adrift, which, and people know I loved your first novel, Hong Kong Rocks. This is a completely different beast to the first novel. And it was one of those ones I was telling Amanda before. Amanda's not, oh, look, people watching it on YouTube now, you'll see the book type cover. Yes, dun, dun, dun. Now, obviously, I'm always a believer in every book you do is a reaction to the previous book, which I'll be asking you about in a minute. I want to learn, first of all, where did this whole the idea for drift first come from?
Well, I would say it was because I was writing and then redrafting this for a long time. So it was begun during COVID.
Hmm.
And at that, my life had changed a lot. From compared to, I'd had the time in Hong Kong, I'd moved back to the UK, but I'd also met Anita, who became my wife, out when I was traveling in Colombia. And then when lockdown arrived, we were visiting each other. She's Argentinian, she was living in Buenos Aires, and we were having a nice time, just spending a little time in each other's countries. And then the COVID happened, the lockdown happened, and we were suddenly trapped apart. She was in Buenos Aires, I was in Lancaster. So I did look into, one of the book opens on a container ship with this, the middle-aged couple who are the protagonists, really, these kind of middle-aged action heroes, and they're traveling by cargo ship, in their case, to escape from the UK and what they see as broken Britain to start a new life in South America. But I was actually looking at going on a container ship before COVID to visit Anita in Argentina. And I was in touch with the guy, and it was doable. They have these cabins on the boats that are normally for like the shipping line staff or employees, but often they're not used, and then they're rented out to tourists or travelers. So I really fancied this idea of doing it. And then I did check um, during COVID. I thought, is this a way of getting to Argentina? But of course, they've stopped doing that. Travel restrictions were everywhere. So that was like the germ of the idea, I suppose. And then also, again, a bit like Hong Kong Rocks, it's a satire, it's contemporary satire. So it's looking at the politics of the day, and partly what they're escaping from is what they see as the very divisive, sort of political situation happening here. And then also, I think the other influence, again, which changed in my life was losing Rich, who I've just mentioned. So I started to reflect a lot more on growing up on the Wirral and my childhood, and I found a way. I hope, fingers crossed, hoping it works, that, to kind of combine the stories of some of the protagonists' youth and friendship on the Wirral, and mix that in, plant the seeds of the contemporary thriller there. And so also have a chance to explore, you get to a certain age, don't you? You do want to look back a bit and say, oh, how did we get here? And then you lose people, you're like, oh gosh, life is so short. So I don't know if that answers it. Those are a
Yeah,
few of the
no,
things
that's
that have
perfect. That's
been my
perfect, mate. Yeah,
yeah.
I think so indeed of it. So, as I asked you just before that as well, um, I said, for almost opinion with novels, any book you do, it's a reaction to the previous book. So, do you look back at it now? It's been completed relatively recently to Hong Kong Rocks, and think to yourself, "Wow, this is different direction from Hong Kong Rocks somewhat."
Well, yeah, in some ways. I mean, I think, like I say, that the satirical element, it's just shifted as I shifted. I think it was different because I was actually writing more about what I was seeing happening in my home country, really, compared to Hong Kong Rocks. I was not quite a tourist. I was living there, but I was sort of an outsider, and I sort of played on that. I was with a lot of other outsiders as well in this sort of Casablanca style limbo. And I suppose with this novel, I was much more engaged with what had been happening in this country politically, and I was immersed in a situation where we were worried about UK visas for my wife and stuff, and this uncertainty of where we could be and what was going to happen. Um, yeah, there probably was a reaction. I mean, I think um, that's the thing. You do want to write something different as well, don't you? Because you're doing all the promo, and I enjoyed writing, promoting, reading from Hong Kong Rocks, but I was also ready for something different. And also, it was different because I was working more independently. It wasn't, with the publisher I've been working with for Hong Kong Rocks. So yeah, so those are a couple of differences, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I agree with you on that one. Now, with Adrift, now this is obviously the thing I reckon I would have done my head in. I'm asking Amanda about this because obviously, if people see it, there's three different time zones in this book. First of all, you've got the cargo ship voyage to South America during COVID, then a murder mystery, yeah, set in 1980s Wirral, and a fractured present in Manchester, where the protagonists are fleeing a crumbling Britain. Now, was it always going to be three different time zones, this, or was it something that crept up in you when you were into the book?
It wasn't always going to be three time zones. Now, I mean, I think bringing in the Wirral element was, even at the time, I thought, oh, I might be overreaching. It might be a bit too ambitious, but I kind of, yeah, I don't know. I had the urge to go back, and it was unfortunately, there was four of us who were mates at school, etc., and two of them are now gone. So that was sort of happening as I'd begun the book in COVID with this cargo ship idea, and I had a real yearning to, perhaps as a kind of therapy to look back on my youth and younger days and try and piece it all together a bit and preserve that. And I did think about doing that as a separate book, because I know other writers I admire have, I know like David Mitchell and others have done a book set in their childhood in the 70s or 80s. So that was a consideration. But I thought, yeah, a friend picked it up the other day. He was like, oh, it's a bit heavy, that. Wow. And I just thought, I'm going to pack it all into this and just see, and so it demanded quite a lot of intricate plotting, which I didn't mind doing. And I thought, I'm going to put it all together. And it did mean it's taken a long time. So it meant it probably gave myself a lot of work by doing it that way, but that's how it developed essentially.
I'm always of the opinion with books when you're doing that is what doesn't break you makes you. And I think you've definitely learned something from this because there's so many layers in this book. But it feels both in a metaphysical and literal feel as well. So now, where did the actual idea for the title come from? Adrift.
Well, it was really about yeah, a couple who were, sort of reaching middle age. They didn't have kids. They were maybe drifting apart, and they'd had their sort of the glory days of going out and all the hedonism of their 20s and 30s, and then stuck together in COVID lockdown, and sort of examining where they were, feeling like maybe they'd drifted apart. Maybe they hadn't fulfilled their potential, or their, or satisfied their ambitions in some way. And then, of course, although, as my friend Zoe Lambert, a great writer, pointed out, the container ship isn't exactly adrift because it's powering on, but there was also an idea of being at sea and being adrift in some way. So it was at least those couple of levels, and also the idea, really, the country and perhaps even the world at that point seemed unmoored and adrift. It was a lot of confusion, which I've sort of incorporated into the book with, Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson and the party. All of it just seemed to be like, what's going on? What's happening here, and different sets of rules for different people, and a world that was drifting towards something bad potentially. And then yeah, and I suppose through the story of Leighton and Serena, the lead characters, they have to decide whether they are going to drift apart forever, if they can be sort of reunited.
Perfect.
So yeah, it did come on quite early, actually. I know for Hong Kong Rocks there were a couple of other titles, but this one was actually always adrift. I like that. It seemed to fit the times.
I remember you telling me about that Hong Kong Rocks when we talked in the last podcast a couple of years ago. It's like there was always some books are like that. When I'm in my second poetry book, it always was going to be the end of summer. And it took me 6 years to write the fucking thing. But yeah, but I knew what the title was going to be right from the off. So I get it completely with that one. So now, I know, obviously, I don't want to give too many spoilers away with the characters on this, but I know all the characters are incredibly deeply flawed, but relatable. Now, I think most of them are probably the people that you ain't going to like in a lot of ways, but I think that's what's good about it because you can relate to them still. But did your approach to some of these characters change during the development of the book, or did they, like the title, did you know what they're all going to be pretty close to the beginning?
Yeah, I had an idea. It's hard to think back, actually. It's a while back now, but yeah, certainly I wanted, I probably won't do it again because I do it too often. But I had the idea of Leighton as a writer, and as as a failed writer, really, who gets co-opted into curating someone's social media account. That's how, before then he was writing sort of adverts for his family's dodgy business and stuff. So I like the idea of having this. And also it's useful having a writer as narrator, because then you've got a way of explaining where all the different sections come from. It's him, but it's his confession, it's his memoir, it's him narrating current events. And but I didn't want him to be quite as cynical as Nick in Hong Kong Rocks. You're not quite as worldly wise. He's a bit of a buffoon. And then he's got a wife who's got very politically driven and very decisive, but perhaps, in a way, that's how they rub up against each other, because she is, almost somebody who, yeah, she wants change and demands change. He's bumbling along a bit more. Um, and then the family, yeah, I mean, his family are quite strange and not not the nicest. But yeah, I did want them to perhaps become more sympathetic over the course of the novel. I don't know how well that happens, but I wanted to give them a chance to, to sort of learn and live and develop. But they do have their funny ways. I mean, the odd thing as well, doing it from the point of view of a writer, is, he's writing it, so his biases go into the book. And at one
Yeah.
point, Serena's reading an extract of the book itself and saying, "I'm not like this." I'm not like this at all. I don't agree with how you're writing it. So I think that's what you're saying about it gets a bit meta and complicated.
Yeah. But I liked
Um,
it. I liked it that way because it gives it builds up the feel of an unreliable narrator. Because I think the danger is
sure.
sometimes when it's the first person, you're taking everything they say as gospel. When it's not always the case. And I found that with this book, John. So that's what I thought. So, yeah, no, I agree with you on that. Now, you just told us obviously a bit about the segments of Confessions of a Failed Writer in the book, which was my favourite sections. I have to ask you, how close to the truth were these bits of you?
Well, I think we're all, it's very hard to know. I mean, what is this? We're all failed writers, aren't we, in a way? I mean, we're all like pushing and thinking, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. And I think through Anita, who's an artist, I've learned to accept that now. I think when I was younger, I was a lot more ambitious and wanted to be this bestseller and stuff. I'm much more at peace with it now. But yeah, that idea of being like a failed writer and being like, with Leighton, he's being paid like peanuts by his his dad and brother, who are a little bit a little bit woo, in their dodgy businesses, and he's having to get by on that, and then he's a social media curator for this deeply unpleasant guy, and he's just thinking, yeah, what am I doing? And so yeah, I mean, I'm glad that's relatable. I think yeah, it's quite cathartic to say that, yeah, to put those bits in.
Yeah.
And again, looking back and going, yeah, what have I done? What am I doing? And then you're like, oh, it's too late now. I've been doing it for years, so I've just got to crack on with the writing, I guess.
I liked it because it made me feel smile. You think like it showed a sense of humour, and it was almost a subtle dig at yourself. And I thought it was fantastic that bit. So now with the
Okay.
book itself, obviously we've hinted already. There's a lot of themes going on in this book, a lot of movement, including themes which include displacement and memory and sociality collapse. Did you have everything set in mind what the themes were going to be for this book, right from the beginning, or did it all merge or come together more naturally?
I think some I did, yeah. I mean, I don't know at what stage, but I realized what I was really writing about it with, which I think applies today, is this idea of whether, there's a crisis and do you stay? And if your human rights are under threat, or you feel like in a way you've got to stand up and say, no, this is wrong, or demonstrate, protest, or do you find sanctuary? There's a lot of that with the characters, not just Leighton and Serena, but also the kind of more, yeah, the wealthier, they're the wealthier characters. It's like, what do you do, when the world's in crisis? Do you run away and look after yourself and those you love, or do you stand and fight? So there was a bit of that, because, and obviously captivated by this journey, like we're going to South America, it doesn't necessarily work out like that. There's a romance about escaping, but actually, if you don't agree with what's happening in your own country, shouldn't you be staying and protesting and doing those kind of things? So that was definitely a theme. I don't know if I'd even planned. That was like, oh yeah, that I realized that's what I'm kind of doing. Quite a few of the characters are making that tough
Hmm.
choice.
Yeah,
What do you do?
there's a
In
lot
that
of
situation.
there is a lot of tough choices in this book, but like I said, with part of the narrative alone been set over COVID, I think I both remember this because we're of that age, unfortunately now. It's like you look at it, think there's a lot of tough choices made over COVID, and it was an impossible situation, whether the book's in a fictional world set in COVID or a real life world. So yeah, good point, mate. Good point. So now, obviously, with the book itself, then. Do you envisage this being a one-off novel, or could there be a sequel?
It's probably a one-off, to be honest. I think it's probably some of the things I've touched on I'll go back to and kind of have done in what I'm writing at the moment.
Mm.
It definitely made me think, oh, I'm quite interested in that, whether that's the idea of, sort of community, or yeah, this idea of like resistance, of people coming together to try and combat, something that's sort of dark and powerful. And so yeah, but I don't know. I don't know. Never say never. I mean, I don't see it as like having a sequel, but there's definitely things I've learned that, or thought, oh no, it'd be nice to go back in the future work and explore that a bit more.
Yeah, no, I get it completely do. I think when you're into your first book, and then you can tell me more about that in a minute, is like, you said already, sometimes things sneak up on you sometimes, don't they? So it's not quite what you're expecting. So yeah, so I get you. Is there
Yeah.
anything you want to reveal about with the third novel? Because I did know you told me last week you had another novel in mind.
Well, there's another novel in mind. I mean, I think this is going to be like the sixth or something novel I've written, because there
Mm,
was a four before Hong Kong Rocks that
mm.
were not, that were self-published. There's one I did at university. So, I think I know over all of those, I do see a certain similar things, but this one is it has some new elements to it. I won't give too much away, but it's got, I've dipped into the supernatural in order to sort of kind of empower the satire in some way. I don't know. And hopefully add to the humor. But it's yeah, like I say, it's a sort of community based, a small community in a place a bit like Lancaster, um, who are, yeah, who find themselves with certain special powers, and also find that they're all terminally ill. So, which
Oh,
doesn't sound very cheerful, but there's comedy elements, and it's how they use those powers before they, they lose their lives essentially. So yeah, I mean so that's in progress at the moment. It's on the third draft I'm working on now. So I'm enjoying it. Yeah,
Fingers crossed. Keep us informed, mate. We'll definitely love to read that one
will
when it's
do.
ready. So, but I know. Well, that's all my questions anyway for the question side of it. To wrap us up, mate, obviously, where can people find you on Facebook? Or not Facebook. We give one clue away straight away there. Social media plugs. Where are the best going, mate?
They can find me on Facebook. I do my best to obscure my identity. So it's Humphrey Peters on Facebook rather than Peter Humphreys. And then on Instagram it's at the Word Diver. You can find me there. And yes, Adrift itself is on Amazon. I've got an author page there which has a few works, including a short story I've recently released with
Oh,
cover
I was going to ask you
design.
about that. Yeah, 'cause I did see that. I've not read it. What's the short story about then? Just very quickly then before we wrap
Well,
up.
that's set in Buenos Aires, where I spent a lot of time. Where Anita had her apartment, and it's really based a lot on. Again, it's set during COVID, and it's about there was the dictatorship over there, really terrible, unbelievably bad times, and somebody who lost family in that awful time, thinking they might have recognized somebody who was responsible um, in during the COVID lockdown. So there's that story, and there's another story about quite a humble guy who works in a fruit and veg stall there. It's sort of interlocking stories, and this was the story that was longlisted for the BBC Short Story Award a few years ago, which was a thrill, although there was no publicity for that. The shortlisted ones, I think, were on the radio and stuff. So it's that usual thing of like, we all take these little successes and you've got to just put it in perspective. So I thought, anyway, I like it. It's probably the best story I've written, so I'm going to release that as well. So you can find that on the Amazon author page, Peter Humphreys, along with a couple of the fiction anthologies I co-edited in Hong Kong.
Perfect. Obviously, people are wondering about Hong Kong Rocks as well. If you love a novel, that can be found in there as well, can't it? Just to clarify as well.
That's on there as well. I mean, I'm doing a launch for Adrift on the 18th of July, and
Oh,
I have copies from the publisher of Hong Kong Rocks. There's some more copies I've got here, which I'll be selling on that night, as well as copies of Adrift and this Justice, which is the Argentinian set
brilliant.
short story.
Great. Well, good luck with it, mate, anyway. So, well, that's all my
Thank
questions anyway for this side of it. Pop, folks. Thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this, mate, for a couple of weeks since I've been reading your novel, mate. So, right,
Oh, thank you, and I've enjoyed it.
we will back everybody in two shakes of the dice when Peter's going to do a couple of extracts from his novel, which I'm looking forward to. Okay, folks, see you all in two shakes of the dice.